I want to thank everybody for coming for our continuing discussion on diversity and inclusion. We've got a number of our panelists who were on with us last time when we were very privileged to have Dr. Freeman Hrabowski from UMBC speak to us about his experiences going back in the 1950s and some of the major revolutions going on in our country as it relates to African Americans and inclusion. We were on a little bit ago with this great panel we put together, again, talking about how it feels like we're having some new conversations and we're having some really old conversations that have been around a long, long time. And my good friend, Seth Weidmann, I'm going to pronounce it correctly. So now we're good friends that I can actually pronounce your name correctly. So I feel good about that. Matt Kinney, Nick Askew, and Dr. Carla Ainsworth. He's going to introduce all of them and talk about their experiences and how we can all work to make our pools more diverse, more inclusive, and how that helps our teams on campus, how it helps you as a coach, and how it can lead to some pretty great friendships and pretty important connections to have down the road. So it's the right thing to do. It's the right time to do it. It's been the right time to do it for decades. And at the end of the day, it can actually be a little self-serving as well, which isn't a terrible thing. So we're here to help our teams. We're here to help our athletes. We're here to help our schools, our campus, and our communities. And there's probably no greater thing that we can do for a lasting legacy in and around our pools than to make it more diverse and more inclusive. And with that, I happily will turn my machine off so I can listen and learn. We do want to thank Swim Outlet for supporting us on this. They've been a great sponsor for many years, and we appreciate their continued belief in what the CSEA stands for and the continuing education that's part of our Coaches Academy. So with that, Seth, good to see you again. You're just a little few minutes north of me, so I can't believe you have blue on, blue and yellow. Those are not Carthage colors. I'm stunned. You're being diverse in your color scheme. You're being very inclusive in your color scheme. So you're walking the walk, my friend. I appreciate it.
That's right. I'm trying. Yeah, I should have checked that a little bit. We have other conference institutions that have these colors. I guess I'm embracing a little bit of my my Swedish heritage. I went to Gustavus Adolphus College, and which is actually black and gold, but the Swedish flag.
Very good.
And of course, it turns out I'm like 5 or 6% Swedish based on my sister's ancestry.
Hey, it's what you identify with. If you identify with Sweden, you
Sure.
grow a little bit. You get a little bit blonder hair, you grow a little bit. So it's cool.
Yes, I used to have the blonde hair too. So thank you so much, Matt, and to the CSEA for continuing this conversation and for having the great conversation and hosting the one that we had in August. I think that we had in mind right from the start that this would be a continued process, right? This is in some ways feels like we're late to the game with some of these conversations, but at the same time, I think we're also learning that it's going to be important for them to be ongoing and not just a certain month of celebrating certain types of diversity, right? We want these conversations to be normalized in many ways. So I'm Seth Weidmann. I'm the head men's swimming coach at Carthage College in Kenosha, Wisconsin. I'm also the NCAA diversity and inclusion designee for our institution. There's a lot of things about my background that kind of led me to be interested in this and do this work. Maybe we'll get into that a little bit. I'm much more interested to get into the background of everybody else on this call. So to start, the gentleman who was able to join me on the last call, Nick Askew from Howard University. If just introduce yourself briefly. Everybody knows you're from Howard, obviously, but if you could just talk a little bit about, your history that brought you to Howard, and then also how long you have been there. And I'll ask the same thing of the other panelists.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Seth, so much. And thanks to the CSCAA for putting together this follow-up call. It's so important, for where we are today and how we're going to move forward. Again, from the Howard University, located in Washington, D.C., currently the only HBCU that has a swimming and diving program. Been here this is my 7th season at Howard. I also was a graduate of Howard University. and originally from Kinston, North Carolina. I think that was what you asked for, to keep it brief.
And if we can move on to Matt from CMU.
Hi, Seth, and thanks for having us. I'm Matt Kinney at Carnegie Mellon. I swam at Kenyon College over in Ohio, and coached for 12 years at Mary Washington College in Virginia, and now I'm the head coach at Carnegie Mellon for what is heading into my 14th season, so here in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania.
Thank you, Matt. And if we could go on to Carla Ainsworth.
Yeah, good morning, everybody. My name is Carla Ainsworth. I also graduated from Kenyon College. I was in the class of 1995 and had the great fortune to have a lot of swimming success. I was a 26-time national champion, individual and relay at Kenyon as part of 4 national titles. And not a swimmer anymore. I now work as a physician. I'm a geriatrician in Seattle, Washington, but still have a lot of love for swimming and thoughts about how, my experience as an African-American swimmer at a place and during a time when there wasn't a lot of that, and sort of what progress we've made and not made over the last 25 years regarding that.
Thank you, Carla. And yeah, I'm glad you led with that. One of my questions was going to be, how does it feel to be so much faster than your very good friend Matt, who's on this call with us? I was going to say, hey, which of your 28 All-American honors was the most special and why? Those are some of the questions I was excited to ask you. But we have.
That's hard.
But I think we have even more important things to talk about here. So one way I wanted to start out, I did want to check in with Nick a little bit because we were both on the call that we were able to have a couple months ago now. And because Nick also is just part of, so many of these conversations that revolve around these topics. I was fortunate to be able to listen in and check in on a diversity in aquatics panel that Nick was on just last week, about a week ago today, I think. So, Nick, if there are any kind of takeaways or things from our last conversation that you can think of, and I can try to do the same as well, from both 2 months ago and then also just last week, or other conversations that you've had recently.
Yeah, absolutely, Seth. I think, I was really, really honored to be on that panel, and especially to have Dr. Herbosky, who really, truly ran through the history, of our country, and especially kind of tying that into where we are in aquatics, where we are with our pools. That was such an important conversation. It was such an important opportunity to have Dr. Herbosky kind of put things in context, understanding how he marched with Martin Luther King, and now he's the president of UMBC, and what they're doing, what he has continued to do in his lifetime, and how he's moving that university forward and being an example for other universities, just tremendous. And obviously having the other panelists like Chad Craddock, and Leah Martindale on the call, as well as yourself. The thing that I'm really, really most happy about is the continuing conversation, being able to have conversations just like this in so many different areas and spaces, so that people can listen, people can also voice, and we can come to an understanding of where we are, how we got here, and then ultimately, what kind of steps and action items can we put in place to move forward. Last week's call with diversity in aquatics was doing an amazing job in our country, and even farther in diversifying our aquatics world, and not just in competitive swimming, but in pretty much everything, scuba diving, water polo, everything that has to do with water, and it was a really, really great conversation, because what that did and gave us an opportunity to do was speak specifically about historically Black colleges and universities and the role that they play in aquatic programming, and knowing, most people wouldn't even know that there were, over 50 HBCUs that had competitive swimming programs in the 1950s, 60s, and 70s, and then it continually started to dwindle down to now ultimately as Howard University is the only one. So that was great because we had an opportunity again to listen and learn a lot about the history, to be able to have an opportunity to see what can we do moving forward. So they've been great conversations. Those were just, two of the many that I've been involved in. I've had an opportunity to listen into, and I can definitely see that we are gaining some traction, but we have to keep the dialogue going. We have to continue to put pen to paper and figure out what are going to be the next steps and how do we measure them.
That's great, Nick. Thank you. Thanks for summing that up better than I could do myself, and for pointing us in a direction that I think we can go in this conversation as well. So much of what I hear you talk about, even just now, but also just in the times I've gotten to speak to you and listen to you talk. To me, what strikes me is how much these stories matter, how much this history matters, how much what we're doing at present matters, and how much what we're going to do into the future matters. I'd love to kind of go around the horn here and hear from you all. The first couple questions I'd put when we had some thoughts and some questions to kind of guide us through this. One of those questions was, why does my story matter? Right. I think this is important to put in the context of the NCAA right now this week. So yesterday, today, and tomorrow, they're in the middle of their diversity inclusion social media campaign. And you can check on the hashtag NCAA inclusion and see some really great thoughts and work that both students and athletes and administrators are doing on campuses around the country. But a big part of that is this idea of why my story matters, why my story is powerful, and also another one was how did I identify what made me more than an athlete, more than just an athlete when I was a swimmer, but also you could say what makes me more than just a coach on my campus as well. So Matt, if you wouldn't mind kind of fielding I know I just threw like 3.5 questions at you, but I think we all also know and trust each other to just kind of have this be an open conversation and dialogue. So any way you feel like speaking to that, I'd love to hear it.
Well, I think, and obviously, Seth, the perspective I have is a little bit different in the sense of I'm not a minority swimmer or coach in the sense of race, but obviously I came out in '93, actually my senior year of college, and Carla and I were teammates at that point. So she went through a lot of that with me and the challenges of that. And being an openly gay coach in the '90s, and we've kind of done some research that I may have been one of the first, if not the first, head coach in NCAA, right? So you don't think like that when you're going through it in the moment of you're living your life trying to create the best environment. Like from a team standpoint, that was always my goal. I thought it was important to be able to speak to others and the otherness of like trying to create a whole community on our pool deck and trying with our team to make sure we were respectful of one another. And I think that insight was always important for me from my experiences. But I think as we were joking about earlier, when you come from a background where you make things kind of the norm and you kind of refuse to believe it's another way, that's good and bad. You can kind of live your life in a very kind of straightforward path and believe that you're representing, others and creating a great environment, but you can also forget that that's not the world at large. And I think that's why, continually we talk about on the team language and the process that matters, and making sure that, we're very respectful of, we have a very diverse team. We always have at Carnegie Mellon. I do think that's one of the few changes in terms of Mary Washington to here. The importance of making sure we're addressing that and opening up that area of conversation so people feel comfortable at all levels, not just in the pool and in and out of the pool at every level of conversation. And that's always been a big part of my coaching philosophy, and obviously how I've been trying to live my life. So, and like I said, I know Carla and I were talking earlier about that being what you think of as the norm when you have teammates that represent certain populations and you think this is one of many, and you realize that is not the case and how important that is to recognize.
Absolutely, Matt. I share a lot of that experience as I've talked about with at least two of these panelists, and unfortunately, I don't know Carla as well. I'm super excited to to be having her as part of this conversation. But I think my background was very similar, right? I was fortunate to come from a diverse community that even the swimming community within that community was more diverse than a lot of other places, and kind of recognizing as an older, once I went into adulthood, maybe even starting in college, recognizing how much that was not the norm. Yeah, so Carla, I'd love to hear. Obviously, there's a lot of overlap with Matt's experience there as far as your guys' undergrad went. But you know, if you could kind of echo some of the things, but also give us a little bit of perspective, echo some of Matt's experiences as well of when you guys overlapped, but experiences yourself of in particular why your story has mattered both at the time but also since then.
Yeah, I think that one of the great things for me with swimming was that it opened a lot of doors for me, right? Like I had opportunities to travel, to compete. I had opportunities because I was a good student and a good athlete, for scholarship opportunities through the NCAA and postgraduate scholarships and some other opportunities that helped me as I went on with the rest of my life. But I think, the reason why, I feel like my story matters and the reason that, inclusion matters for the NCAA is just so that we have the next generation of people to understand, how many opportunities they have, right? Like that, I don't think that we have done a good job of helping young kids of color in America to imagine all of the different ways in which they could find a path to college and find a path to achievement, right? And that, maybe that is historically lived in football and basketball, or maybe lived, sort of in this current generation in soccer, right? But that there are all of these other sports which provide a gateway to college opportunities that kids otherwise wouldn't have. And that, talented, interested kids need to be combined with opportunities to try sports and do things. And, I live in Seattle now, which is a community with a lot of water and still a lot of kids of color who don't even know how to swim, right? And so that if we have kids who really can't imagine themselves being that kind of athlete, or thinking that they could be a swimmer or be a water polo player and be successful, they just can't imagine what other doors might open for them. So I was really delighted to I found my way into swimming through the public pool through the summer league team in Lawrence, Kansas, right? Like, and I think that's one of the other challenges, right, is that we have kids who it's harder and harder for them to connect with sport opportunities, and certainly, sort of development or elite sport opportunities then have dollar signs attached to them and other barriers that make it harder and harder for kids to get in. But, I just wanted to say, like, if you like moving your body and you like, racing, right? Like, that's why I liked swimming. Like, I liked getting to the wall first, and like that served me for a long time. And there's plenty of kids out there who would have wanted that opportunity if anybody had sort of, led them to the pool. And so I think, in addition to trying to think about how to make our teams look different, if you think about how, particularly college teams, because college kids, and right, this is all sort of imagining pre and post COVID. I realize that we're in a unique sort of pause right now, but I know that Matt's team does work with Special Olympics and work with, like connecting with community and really talking about things. I know that Nick and the kids at Howard are running camps and really trying to connect with kids and communities and work with the Y to try to think about, how do we help kids to imagine that like swimming is fun and something that they, not only they need to be able to do for safety, but they could do that's going to let them, ultimately get to school and see the world and do a lot of different stuff. And, the more and more stories that we have of that, right? Like if you think about, the Olympics, if that's one of the places where swimming gets showcased, right? So like we can have, Simone Manuel, and we have like a moment where people are like, oh, there is a Black person who's doing that, right? Like, and we have a few of those, but think about how few of those we've had over, the last sort of 30, 40 years. So I love how the NCAA has sort of committed to really trying to tell stories, of difference, and the folks who really had a lot of success or just had opportunity. And I, part of the reason I sort of keep coming back to this, and sort of whenever the NCAA would ask me to do stuff, I would say yes, was just because I wanted to be able to bring another voice to that.
Well, thank you for bringing that voice here today. I think that so much of that is so important. Speaking of the sort of that highest level, and the fact that we've been fortunate to see swimmers at the highest level, more recently, just in the past, decade, certainly. Nick and I have talked many times about the fact that, and of course, I wanted this to be more of a free-flowing conversation. I don't have all my statistics up here, so Nick can correct me on some things. But having USA Swimming in the past 15 years or so, Black and African American participation rising somewhere in the neighborhood of 50, 55%, something like that. But still, the overall number is around 1%, right? Even with that growth, and so just the reality of what those numbers really mean, and why we while it's amazing to see those highest level athletes representing, and of course we haven't quite seen what might come of that, right, and some of the inspiration that comes from that, the reality is that it's still just such a large hurdle that it's going to take a lot of different things to try to work on that. I think this is perfect little segue to Nick here. So I would love to hear both your perspective. You have such a unique perspective in the college swimming community, because not only are you the director of swimming at Howard, the only HBCU that currently has a swim team, you also are the director of tennis, another sport that historically feels underrepresented from certain populations. So if you wouldn't mind speaking a little bit to, I'm sure you have some great thoughts off of what Carla was saying there, and don't be shy of even sort of having that also lead into some other aspects of your life and your career.
Yeah, it's really interesting to be the director of two Olympic sports, and my life has just led me to be blessed in the opportunity to participate in those two sports. Just those were the ones I chose, or they chose me, whichever way we want to look at it. But then also to be able to coach elite levels with those, and there's a lot of commonalities in terms of looking at the representation from minority communities, and especially Black and brown people in both of swimming and diving, as well as in tennis. And they share a lot of the similarities in why, why it has led to this. I think in swimming, it's a lot more difficult, because even for anyone of any race, any color, any background, any identity, it's so hard to burst that bubble to become kind of, the elite level. Like, I mean, you look at the ones who the first swimmer that pretty much anybody can name, if you ask, okay, what swimmer do you know? They'll say Michael Phelps. Look how high he set the bar, with all of his Olympic accomplishments, et cetera, et cetera. And then after that, it's like, okay, well, who else can you name? Maybe Katie Ledecky. Look how high she set the bar. And that continually happens. And that's, that definitely, I think, has its pros, and it definitely has its cons. But it also doesn't really truly help us grow the base quite as much as we really want to all the other different levels. And Carla kind of hinted toward this, and all the other opportunities that sport can definitely lead into. And speaking specifically about the swimming community, lifeguard positions, pool operator positions. I would definitely, in my life, I didn't want to work at a fast food restaurant growing up. I wanted to be a lifeguard. That was the cool job. That was so much better than the fast food industry or working retail or anything like that. Those are other opportunities, and there are so many others that can definitely open up to us. In the sport of tennis, we have been more fortunate, because I think there is the way to get to the top of the numbers, the way it works out, you definitely can see more representation. Normally we see the Olympics for swimming, every 4 years, and we only see the finals. We don't see the first rounds of the Olympics. And, and maybe not until recently, we really didn't even see the NCAAs in March for swimming and diving. But for tennis, 4 times a year for the Grand Slams, you would see the entire field at that level. And that's, the hundreds of athletes when they show the wild card, et cetera. And you were more likely to see people of color. You were likely to also see more representation. And the additional fact that it's for those Grand Slams, you also see the global community. That definitely has assisted more in the sport of tennis. But tennis is also suffering, from their base, and being able to get more of those athletes to go through the avenues to be able to play, junior level tennis, to be able to play college tennis, and then even onto the pro circuit. So there's definitely a lot of similarities, but then I think, there's some spaces where each of them kind of have an advantage. And I think, again, we really just have to do an amazing job of continuing to put the imagery out there, be able to put the perspective out there. I speak adamantly about how growing up, looking at a swimming pool, even a tennis court, that did not necessarily look like the place where I belong, because I didn't see people, who I thought, were a reflection of me. So it was very easy to go to the basketball court or the track or the football field, and do that. I think we just have to do an incredible job of, changing that narrative, being able to put that exposure out there. And swimming definitely has it tough, because we typically only see it every 4 years, and then tennis, and not quite as much, because we see it at least 4 times per year, a little bit more representation.
Thank you. I think this leads, as much as I want to make sure this conversation, at least the second half of it, has a lot to do with, inclusion within our programs, campuses and communities, inclusion of all kinds. I do think this might be a good time to kind of speak a little bit on what Nick was just talking about. So the challenges of trying to get more representation at that very kind of base level, foundational level. And I think this speaks a lot to what certain campuses, communities are doing. Carla brought up a lot of those. I think it was great that she was able to highlight some of the things that she knows through her friendship with Matt, what Matt's done at Carnegie Mellon, and some of the stuff that I think a lot of us know that Nick has done at Howard. Nick, if we could hang on you just for an extra minute here, and speak on some of those efforts. One that really caught me, and this is partly because we hadn't spoken about it either in our personal conversations or even in our conversation a couple months ago. But I love last week during the Diversity in Aquatics talk, you highlighted the diving initiative that you've been able to do with your diving program. I don't know if you could use that as kind of a jumping off point for that, and then also some other things that you've been able to do.
Yeah, absolutely. I love talking about it. We're really excited about creating a youth diving program here in Washington, D.C. And one of the biggest things is we sat down as a coaching staff and we identified the problem. We don't have enough divers in our swimming, in our program, and we lose points, and we're a competitive program. We don't like losing points. So what we decided to do is say, okay, well, let's we canvass the areas we're doing our recruiting and everything, but there's just not, we talked about tennis. That's a very low percentage of Black and brown people who are participating. We talk about swimming. That's an even lower amount of people participating. When we talk about diving, dear goodness, I'll give you a quick story. When I first took over the position, I reached out to USA Diving and let them know who I was and what I was looking for, and could they help me with kind of identifying, minorities within the diving community. They immediately picked up the phone and called back and said, "Hey, can you help us?" Try to identify. And I was like, wait a minute, that's kind of the opposite of what I was looking for. But, through the conversation, we've been continuing to kind of work on different things. But here at Howard, we have created a youth diving program in the inner city of Washington, D.C. And to be able to develop it right here local, like local produce, basically. And we're working with a partnership with the DC Department of Parks and Recreation to be able to do that. And our actual team, current divers, are going to be volunteer coaches for that youth diving program. And if we get one diver that comes to Howard, then that's amazing. But it's ultimately to continue to increase the amount of minorities that are actually participating in the sport of diving, because we just don't see enough of programs that are out there that are able to kind of field the needs for diving programs in general. And we've done several other things on campus to make sure that our program stays extremely relevant. And that's one of the ones we've done in the community. We're doing the exact same thing for water polo. We're also partnering with some of the elementary schools to do tutoring and volunteering. During our meets, we try to make the meets very spectator friendly, because I mean, quite honestly, I'll say it, and I'm okay if people disagree, but unless you're a swimmer or a diver or a swim parent or a diver parent, swim meets are not the most interesting places to be. They're not the most spectator friendly. They're hot, they're long, and especially in this day and age where everybody has a smart device, you might even miss the event that you coerced your best friend to come and see you participate in. It happens all too often. So what we've done is we've tried to really create an environment at our facility that is really spectator friendly. The first thing we did is we have an on-deck DJ, and we play music, throughout the entire meet that keeps the crowd going. And, we even, we talk through it and say, okay, make sure that the coaches that are visiting us are okay with it. They're like, yeah, that's one of the perks of coming to you guys, is being able to liven it up a little bit. But also being able to invite the community, not just the campus community and leadership, your provost or your chancellor or your president, or the deans, to be volunteer assistant coaches, for the competition, because it creates that buy-in, it creates that investment. And those are leadership individuals who are ultimately going to be at the table when programs are going to be discussing, we got to make cutbacks. And they may be like, well, I don't know about the swimming and diving program. They seem to be doing really good for us, and et cetera, et cetera. And then expanding out that. We've invited council members to be volunteer coaches and come to our meets. We've invited the mayor to be a volunteer coach and come to our meets. And obviously these are high profile people with very busy schedules, so it doesn't always hit, but at least that invitation has been put out there. So that's the short list of a lot of things that we have going on. And I'm happy to work with other coaches and explain how we were able to accomplish it, and what other ideas we are, because I think it's just great. It will be great for our sport, and great for the young men and women that come through our sport in every capacity.
Yeah, so many ideas that I want to take. I wish we were not in this fall 2020 world, because after talking to you over the summer, I would have been utilizing a lot of these. So I need to make sure they stay high on the list. I think you're so right about the invites to folks around campus or the community to be part of things. I was really fortunate just a couple of years ago. We had a new president at Carthage here, and sort of took it as an opportunity because he was trying to get out more, right? I don't know if it would work now that he's been here a few years, but, convinced him to come to the first night of finals of our conference championship. And he drove, he traveled to come to that, and, got him involved on deck. He was doing the team cheer with the team, right? He was able to witness our 200 free relays, both on the women and men's side, win and go on to nationals as well. So it was just like, all the things fell into place for him to just be like, wow, swimming and diving is about the coolest thing we have going here at this institution. So I echo a lot of those ideas. The other piece of that is trying to get the investment from our programs back into trying to make some of that foundational work happen. Matt, any experience with that? Any thoughts on what you've tried to do? I know you've done some work with Special Olympics, as Carla said, but if you have any other thoughts on that, or things that you have tried and honestly haven't really worked. I have a few of those experiences as well, where I've tried to do things and either they kind of fell flat on their face, or I was kind of told no because of the type of institution that I was at, and just hit a lot of roadblocks. So anything you'd love to speak about here?
Well, first, Nick, I love the fact that you do tennis and swimming, which are my two favorite sports. And we joke all the time. We just had a conversation last week about like tennis and minorities in general, just because you look at the Williams sisters, right? They've been around for almost 25 years. And it's only been in the last 4 or 5 years that you've seen this new wave of athletes coming along after them, after that huge level of success. And obviously Serena being arguably one of the best, if not the best of all time. But the importance of visibility, because here's a prime example. There is no better spotlight, and yet it's taken that long. So when we're only getting it every 4 years, even if Simone or Colin Jones or somebody else can make those impacts, I do think it is really important to somehow promote it. And obviously you're coming up with a lot of great ideas and a lot of fun ideas, because swim meets are not always the most fun for people. We all agree that we've all been recruiting, we know. I think the one thing that really struck me when you were talking, Nick, and we do, Special Olympics, we do volunteering with a local elementary school on the reading and tutorial side. We're big community service advocates. I think that's a huge part of any program that I've been in. But I think that the challenge is, because I've taught lessons and I've done swimming programs, and both in Ohio and here in Pittsburgh, and I think the challenge for me is always the continuity. Like, we can do 4 to 6 week programs, and we can go in and make a really nice impact and have this wonderful experience with the young kids and having that. But I think finding the funding and the resources to help create those community programs that actually allow, and I think that's the bigger change from a organizational standpoint, right? Like, if there's no pool, we go through the same thing. We try to bring small, like elementary schools into our pool all the time, and we get shot down 9 times out of 10. It's a campus environment, and that's a very, like, we push and push and push, but I'm sure they get asked a million times for different things. And I think that's a challenge of, you're going to still find ways to interact, but until those resources are there, I do think that that's also another push we need to make, right? So that there's young coaches that want to get out there and maybe start a program in an area that has a pool that's being underutilized, or finding ways that continuity, because we all know, I mean, my 9 months out of the year of coaching that we have full season is exhausting. I can get more involved in that during the 3 months, but that's not enough. Like, that's not going to sustain a program to be able to do that. And I think kind of mentoring, or at least offering assistance to maybe other coaches that they have that as a primary focus, or getting involved. We have a YMCA here in town, in one of the poorer areas of town. It's got a brand new pool, and we've been trying for years now to get lessons started and keeping that going a little bit. And it helps, but I definitely think that it's something that, as an advocate, it's huge and it's a starting point, but it's not going to sustain unless we have that continuity there.
Yeah, I share that same experience of, trying to be such an open and inclusive program, and inviting different groups in, and it just not quite working for so many different reasons. The one thing that I'll say has gained some traction, and unfortunately we then went into this fall, and so things are going to kind of be starting from scratch again. But I have the experience of, about 8 or 10 years ago, when I was working in my hometown of Evanston, Illinois, had these same problems, right? So I was working for YWCA, whose, whole mission is, eliminating racism, empowering women, completely advocacy driven organization. Fortunately, so I'm a head swim coach, but just as importantly, I work for this organization, right? So it's absolutely on the forefront of the mind of every piece of leadership at that organization to try to do this work within the swimming community. But every time we would try to either reach out to the community, through community organizations, through churches, even through individual schools, always told no, right? And really only able to make a shift once there was this community-wide initiative to come up with actually thousands of great ideas, to then whittle it down to 100 great ideas, to then get voted on to do 10 great ideas that were actually going to be supported. And lo and behold, teaching Evanston kids to swim ended up on that list of 10 great ideas on this lakefront community with no public pools, on and on and on, right? So that's amazing. And, we were able to actually get buy-in from the school district to just make it happen, right? So all the reasons we were told no just kind of disappeared from the years before, because the community asked for this, right? And we were able to start with a pilot program where, the YMCA, the YWCA, and a couple of the retirement homes that actually had pools there that gave up the space for us. Started with three of the 8 elementary schools, and by 2 years later, all 8 elementary schools had all of their second graders on one time a month on the half day, which was always Wednesday. There was one Wednesday every month that was a half day. Every child was offered some lessons, and it took a while to actually get full participation as well, because we were also hitting those barriers of, you know, the generational lack of swimming and all the things that we know have led to that in especially in diverse communities, which Evanston is one. And so I move up to Kenosha 6-7 years ago, and I'm like, great, we're gonna do this here, right? Like I'm gonna make this happen. And 6 years later was in kind of coming up to the same roadblocks. Fortunately, there was a Safety Around Water Coalition that was formed just 2 years ago because of drownings that were happening on Lake Michigan, and had just over this past spring, winter and spring, led to actually some buy-in from the district, like it was going to move that way. But then, of course, we're living through what we are right now. So, it just kind of speaks to, again, this is important work, but and it sometimes feels like we're hitting up against some roadblocks, but there are models that have worked and done this well, right? So Evanston is not the only community. There are other even larger major cities that have really tried to tackle this as a problem that they can address.
Yeah, I think, talking specifically to that, Matt hit the nail on the head. Continuity, I think, is one of the important keys. And hey, look, we're all coaches and we're all professionals. Most of our success has depended on how well we plan, and how well we lay things out. And definitely that 9 months when we're in that grind of the season, that's probably going to be a lot lighter. But I think that's really where we have to lean on other organizations, whether it be the Y or the American Red Cross, or even Diversity in Aquatics, or something else that might be in the community that might be of service, and say, okay, what can I commit? Can I commit 2 of my swimmers or divers, once every 2 weeks to show up to their practices? Obviously, you can't do it full time, but if they can keep it going, if they can sustain it and do pop-ins. And then the other side of that, and this is just me, as you were talking, Matt, just kind of ideating and thinking through it, having them come to the meets and making sure that they are at least connected in some way, some form. And then when we are free, to be able to pour in more physically, because, I know very well as a head tennis coach and a head swimming and diving coach, I can't be at 2 places at one time. Where am I really going to put my efforts in, and in what period of time? And I think, those are very important. And Seth, if you don't mind, I think the other portion, it was going to kind of answer one of the questions that came up in the chat really quick, talking about how do we showcase that diversity in organizations or in the program. And what I would suggest is, be very careful of not having those 2 individuals, that one individual, become your token person. I think that is very dangerous. I think the best thing to do is to continue to really showcase your team or your organization as much as possible, and make sure that they're involved. Make sure, that they are feeling comfortable being involved. And that will then, I think, just naturally continue to spread it, because again, seeing, that one person or those few people, et cetera, and then seeing it grow out, I think can lead to solutions down the road. It's not going to be immediate. It's not like, oh, I see one person, I'm going to jump on board with that. No, it's going to take time to develop, and it's going to take people being comfortable to do it. But that was my thoughts towards that question, and then obviously the conversation that we're having.
That's great. Thank you, Nick. Carla, yeah, I was going to ask for you to jump in on this as someone who's, I think we can all agree, you're smarter than the other just swim coaches that are in the room here. So I'd love to hear a little bit. You mentioned that you're in a community now in Seattle where, again, a water community, right? But certainly lacking in some participation. Just any thoughts you have on any of this, or models that maybe have come around in your head as you've thought about things?
Yeah, no, I think Seattle, actually, the city of Seattle has an initiative similar to the stuff you were talking about, Seth, in terms of 4th and 5th grade kids can have access to free lessons, right? Like they wanted sort of every kid to get out of elementary school knowing how to swim, but they didn't sort of do the implementation, right? Like there's a difference between saying, if you sign up for swim lessons, they're going to be free, right? That means that your parent has to be organized enough to figure out how to sign up for swim lessons and get you there and do the thing. The difference when you say like, hey, we're going to bring your 4th grade class once a month to the pool, right? Like that, when you build it into the place where they already are, so it's not dependent on individual families who have a lot of other stressors, that just sort of makes it happen. But it does involve the partnerships between pools, oftentimes community pools, I love the retirement home pool option, right? Because like some of them do have pools and they're not used very much, right? Or there's like one person in them, right? Like again, not COVID, but I can see, just really leveraging the community. And the thing that I really like about that is when you build those community partnerships, then if you feel under threat at home, right, like at your sort of home institution, and not because your home institution is trying to be threatening, but because it's a difficult time, right? Like because you do have some allies sort of outside of your institution who also show up and say, your team has really been important to our community in this way, and we really care about that, right? That when you can do that, particularly with big organizations who do have some dollars that they need to spend in this way. I think that both the YMCA and the YWCA are great ones for that. I mean, I think we saw this summer, right, that people wanted to support efforts to sort of turn the corner on racial injustice and were willing to put a lot of money, right? When people sort of don't know what to do, they're like, oh, I should give somebody some money, I feel better, right? Like that's an opportunity, and I think if you can partner with organizations who can help to do that so that you get to bring somebody else's money to the table, right? Like that also allows you to have that continuity, right? Because you're not having to come back to your institution, which said you can do this year, but next year is going to be tough. So you're not going to get to do it again next year. And you're sort of like, I don't have to depend on you. So I think really trying to think about how to find those partnerships and how to find sort of the peripheral connections that can offer some sustainability. I mean, I think you do just have to sit around and be creative about that, right? Like, and you have to sit and think and talk about it. But I know that there's a lot of interest right now. And so, never let a good crisis, not become an opportunity to try to take advantage to serve, your athletes and your community in a way that's going to be helpful. I did want to sort of pivot back, just as Nick had tried to talk about, sort of thinking about how to spotlight, athletes of color on your team without tokenizing them, which is clearly a risk. And I completely agree that the priority really has to be to have your team, to spotlight your team, right? Like that it needs to be authentic in the way that you can say, like, what we do is we have our team show up and then people get to say like, oh, look, there's Black swimmers because we saw your team and there were Black swimmers among them, but not to make your Black swimmers go parade out and talk about who they are and what they do. And I'll say, I think we completely underestimate how much that is happening, right? How much those athletes are being observed, singled out, spoken to about their sort of unique experience already. So please be really thoughtful about not trying to add on any burden to them, and about asking them, sort of respectfully in the context of asking the whole team to say, I need you to show up for this and this is important, about sort of asking what they think they need. And sometimes what they need is like to not have to be the face of that, right? Like, it's like, I'm doing enough labor, emotional labor to get through the day in racist America in 2020, that I'm not gonna show up and try to make you feel better, right? Like, which is sometimes what the ask is. So I think that people are better about that than they were 20 years ago, honestly. I think people sort of have noticed that burden and are trying to be intentional about it, but still want to say, but I think you're so great. And to have you be in front would really help us. And we just have to be more patient, right? It has to be more authentic, and we have to let sort of the change in our full team buoy that to the top, as opposed to asking them to lead on that.
Seth, I'll add to that with Carla, just because you already pointed out how much faster she was than I am and how much smarter she is than I am. So part of the challenge of Carla as a being in college is not only the presence of her on deck, is that she was, this double honors major with great grades, and she was musical director of an a cappella group, and she was involved in admissions. And so she did really kind of set the bar, but I think the bar for her was not about necessarily being a Black woman, just like she was just great, right? Like, so I think that's the piece that I'm sure at times, Carla, you must have felt a little bit of that aspect growing, at that point, but we didn't notice it. She just made us all look bad. So we just kind of took that for what it was worth and moved on from there. So, I think it's really interesting 30 years later to see kind of what that perspective is for you too.
Yeah, thank you for that, Carla and Matt. Matt, if we could stay on you for a minute here, I think that another piece of this is some of these kids and college students from all backgrounds. I know that we've talked a lot about the LGBTQIA population, and I think that there could be some definite parallels with trying to make sure that we are highlighting and embracing and including without tokenizing people of different backgrounds. And so if you have any thoughts on that, but I'll also just follow up with something that I've shared this with you before, but we haven't talked about in a space like this. But I had an experience just in the past few years of I feeling like I'm this very open and inclusive coach. Some of the most important people in my life are my sister and her wife and their beautiful daughter, and was very kind of outspoken, I thought, at least, with trying to make my program inclusive. And I still had a young man who came through and had transferred from another similar historically religious and predominantly white institution, had spent a freshman year somewhere, spent his sophomore year here, moved on again, and has now finished, but wrote a beautiful essay just last year about his experience of not being able to come out at those institutions and what that, how that affected his life. And, I reached out to him right away and said how proud I was, and can I use your story? And he was like, of course, and, I kept a good relationship with him, but I've thought so much about that over the past few years, and just making sure that we're really hitting on this idea of being an open and inclusive program and an institution.
Well, sure. And I think, for me, there are similarities in terms of visibility, right? I think one of the challenges when, growing up in Ohio in the middle of nowhere in the 90s and 80s, I'm older, I get it, is there was no representation for me either, right? I didn't even know what being a gay man was until I was 19 or 20. And it's that's a very late time in your life to kind of figure out all of these negative connotations that you've associated that had really no meaning because you didn't actually understand that were now directed towards you, right? So there's a whole different separate spectrum of messed upness in that in itself, right? So I think as a coach, the one thing that I've always kind of believed is if you are being authentic in yourself, and for me, it's been pretty easy, and I don't want to say easy because I had a very hard coming out experience, but I am very much I could not cover this, my emotions or how I'm feeling, if you paid me. I am very much 100% me at all times. And so I think that aspect to my personality, being an openly gay coach, also kind of makes the kids realize, on my team anyways, I'm their coach. Me being gay is a part of that. And then they realize how comfortable they can be in that process too, having those conversations. But I think, that opens up a bigger spectrum, from my end, if we're talking about, misogyny in sports, right? So you look at the language we use, and I've been aware of that for generations because as a good gay man, I've had a lot of female friends from way back when that I really wanted to be, not protective of, but I didn't understand. I didn't understand those kind of different language uses. So it's always been kind of there, right? I don't understand why people would use language like that or create an environment that was not, there should not be a word coming out of your mouth that makes somebody feel bad about themselves, right? There's no need for that in athletics. And I think that covers a pretty wide spectrum. And I think if that's the drum that you're beating in terms of, we will not use those kind of things here, it at least opens up the freedom for others, right? So people, and I don't even know what that means anymore because I'm not really sure there is a non-other anymore. I think it opens up that spectrum to say we're comfortable and we can, I've had now dozens upon dozens of, gays by, questioning, figuring out, and then you talk about all these other areas of their lives that they're working through. And I do think that really opens up exactly what you're talking about, that opportunity for them to kind of be comfortable and creates just a better environment. And I think, we laugh all the time. I'm a real pain in the butt as a coach, right? Carla can attest to this as a person, but as a coach, I'm a real pain in the butt. We have 91 kids on my team, and I don't let walk-ons on anymore. And it's I do feel like if we can create an environment where as tough as I am on the swimming side of things, but as supportive as I am on the other side of things, the kids love being in that environment. And I think that to me is where that's what we're trying to accomplish. Like I want to be good. We want to have the best team, all of these other areas. But I think at the end of the day, when you've had all these years of being able to add to the experience of these student athletes, that's what it comes down to. And I think by creating a more inclusive environment, just period, you're going to be successful in that. So, that's kind of been my takeaway. I am not saying that I am an expert on this in any way, shape, or form, but it's what has worked for me. And, I think the one thing that when you look at, we talked about Carla and Tasha Willis, who at one point were the best two sprinters in Division III swimming and diving, the visibility thing, I think that happened 10 years ago, 8 years ago, right? Where we have Facebook, we have, all these different social media outlets. I do think it was such a big deal, right? But where were you, Carla, in 1991? What nationals was that? Williams?
Buffalo.
That's right.
Great news.
But, outside of the 300 spectators and all of us who were a part of that process, that wasn't celebrated as much as it probably could be now. And I think it is a shame that we can't promote, that's historical, but I think that was such an impactful moment when you look back at history of swimming and diving. And, so that visibility factor, we joke, I just commented on this, me coming out in 1993, I must have come up 10,000 times over the course of my life before I could post it on Facebook, right? And now at least I'm out, right? From the Facebook way, I'm out. But I've been out that entire time. It's exhausting, but the visibility factor in there is so key. And I think it goes exactly to what Nick is saying and what Carla's been saying. We have to show, and I think leading that example, but the more opportunities, like I said, I'm taking these, I want to DJ on deck now at some meets, right? I just think stuff like that, it's that visibility factor of engagement is just so key. And like I said, I could sing Carla's praises all day because I'm used to doing that from college years. But, I think those accolades and those accomplishments are just so important to continue to represent us, right? As a group of what we're capable of being and being a little bit better with that. So that's kind of my piece anyways.
I appreciate that. Thank you so much for that piece, Matt. It's so I'm going to call Matt Zimmer back in this for a second, just because we hadn't talked about timing. So I want to know if we're supposed to do a hard stop here, or if we want to keep going for a few more minutes. So Matt, help us.
I think we can go. Yes, I will guide you and I'll continue. It's a good talk, so please proceed. Now this has been great. We typically go 45 minutes to an hour, so we're right to throw some Q&As in there, throw something into the chat for follow. But another few minutes, absolutely. Please keep going.
Say, Seth, if we have a minute, I wanted to circle back with you talking about your athlete who told their story later. One of the things that I've experienced in my professional life, so I work as a family physician, I spent a lot of time, sort of the last 15 years, training family physicians when they came out of medical school and they were doing their residency. We learned sort of as the faculty that we were pretty far behind our learners. And I imagine that you guys have that experience sometimes with your athletes as well, right? Some of these conversations about genderqueer, or some of these conversations about BIPOC, and sort of the way that we think about things, that they were kind of when are you guys going to catch up, right? They were sort of pretty disappointed in us, and we were pretty slow to the party, though we thought ourselves pretty progressive. And I think that when you have opportunities where you see that it didn't go the way that you had hoped it would go, even though you feel like you're an inclusive place, that's such an important space for us to circle back and say, hey, I want to tell you guys this story where it feels like we didn't do our best. And I didn't create a space, not that you alone can create the space that makes somebody feel okay about something, right? But highlighting those stories and talking about it together with your athletes in a way to say, help me to understand what you think we could do differently to not have this happen, right? That this is messy work. DEI work is complicated, and we all make missteps. We commit microaggressions, right? And the sooner that we can create a space where we say, like, hey, like, can we just circle back on what you said? Because like, this is how I heard it, and I don't think that's what you meant, right? Like, but that where we can sort of create pauses and allow people to talk about, you know, how they've felt unsettled or how they felt hurt by things that have happened. And I think that you have such a great opportunity. Like, college students are like in the heart of this, right? Like, they're finding themselves and they're working so hard on this and they care so much about this, that really leveraging them, I think, is going to help the rest of us to get better faster. And the sooner that we can sort of show up with humility about that is going to make that easier to do.
I can't really think of a better way to kind of wrap things up than that, Carla. So I appreciate that. You know, it does bring up that, I thank you so much for that perspective. You know, we had reached out to the NCAA Office of Inclusion, and there's a woman, Nia Blair, who I've had the pleasure of being on some calls with, and unfortunately, just with everything going on this week, she had too many commitments to hop on here. But you know, I had said that we would certainly be kind of tying this into that campaign that they're doing. And I think that your perspective you just gave, Carla, was like spot on with what they would want to be talking about here as well. So I really think that's a good place to wrap things up and offer space here for any kind of any other final thoughts. And if there were any questions that anybody got kind of on the side, or I know we were able to answer at least one great question that came in from the chat. Everyone just wants Carla to have the final word, huh? That was, yeah, I do too.
Typical.
It's hard to
No
follow
one wants
that
to follow
up.
Carla on that one. She nailed it. Yeah.
Well, yeah, I'll turn it back over to you, Matt, for if you have any things that you want to close out with. Again, I just appreciate so much for you know, for Nick and Matt and Carla to hop on here with us for this conversation, and hopefully this, you know, I certainly love that. I think this is one of the more entertaining, you know, talks that we've had, along with being informative, which I think is just another, you know, thing that points towards us kind of normalizing these conversations and continuing these conversations as we move forward.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I'll echo that. Thank you, Seth, and thank you, coaches, and thank you, Doctor, for joining us. We appreciate what you guys have put together. And have a smile on their face, and you can tell that you're in a better place, even though all of you guys have gone through some challenging situations, but and it's a testament to how the sport can really challenge and enrich you for your life. And that's, I think, the ultimate message that we want to be able to provide, that the sport of swimming, we should expand that. It doesn't take any way to be more expansive and inclusive. It just spreads the love a little bit farther. And what you're doing on the pool deck and out in the world, out in Seattle every day. So thank you guys for coming on and spreading a little bit of that joy and sharing how the challenge is worth it, and you want to give back and want to see it expand. So thank you for that. And with that, tomorrow we've got a talk with tomorrow we're going to have a talk with Army and Navy, talking about rivalries. So please jump on for that one. That should be a good one, because rivalries are the other fun aspect of our sport that we get to do. So, you know, friendly competition across the pool, and none better than our own Army Navy folks. So thanks again, coaches. Thanks again, Dr. Ainsworth, and look forward to seeing you guys real soon. Thanks a lot.
Thanks so much, you guys.